Welcome back. Today I'm sharing how to make this beautiful ombre chocolate cake. We start by making our cake batter with 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 3 cups of granulated sugar, 2 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of salt. We're going to mix that together on a low speed until the dry ingredients are incorporated, and then we're going to mix in 1 cup of unsalted butter. We're going to mix this again on a low speed until the butter is really worked into the dry ingredients and it starts to look kind of crumbly like sand. Then it's time to add in 1 cup of egg whites. We're going to mix that on a low speed until the batter starts to look a little bit wet. Then we add in 1 1/2 cups of buttermilk in 2 additions. If you add it all at once, it kind of explodes out of the bowl, so this just helps it mix in easier into the batter. At this point in time, I like to take a break and actually scrape the sides of the bowl to make sure that everything is getting properly mixed together. Sometimes some butter can get stuck there, and I also make sure to scrape all the way down to the bottom of the bowl. Then I add in 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And then it's time to turn this vanilla cake batter into ombre chocolate cake batter. I evenly divide my batter between 4 bowls, and I actually like to use my digital scale to make sure they have the exact same amount of batter in them. And then I add different amounts of flour and cocoa into each bowl, and this is going to transform it into different colors of chocolate cake layers. I like to use dark cocoa powder for this. I just really love the taste that it gives the cake layers, and it gives them more of a rich color. After my cake batter is all ready to go, I line and grease 4 7-inch cake pans. I like to use parchment rounds that are pre-cut, and then I just spray some nonstick spray into them. Each bowl goes into its own pan, and then these bake in the oven at 350 degrees for about 35 minutes. While the cake layers bake, I work on my frosting, which includes 3 cups of unsalted butter, a teaspoon of salt, and 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. Once those are mixed together, I start to slowly incorporate 10 cups of powdered sugar, which seems like a lot. This is an American buttercream, and it is pretty sweet, but it's also super delicious, so just trust the process. As I'm gradually doing this, I add in 1/3 cup of heavy cream about halfway through, and this just makes the frosting easier to mix. So once my frosting comes together, it's definitely a bit on the thin side, or at least thinner than the frosting that I usually make for cakes, and that's because we're going to incorporate cocoa and melted chocolate into this to make our ombre chocolate frosting. And both of those ingredients are going to thicken up the frosting as we add them. When I made this cake for the first time, I actually slowly increased the amount of dark cocoa I added to my frosting as well as the melted chocolate to create the different colors or different shades of chocolate frosting. But in hindsight, I think it would be a lot easier to get the different colors of frosting if we made it the same way that we made our cake batter and colored it. So in my instructions, it's slightly different than what you're seeing here, where I'm gradually making darker frosting in my KitchenAid. But the rationale is just that it's a lot easier to make sure the shades are right if you do them in separate bowls all at once, as opposed to gradually doing it like this. But in the end, if you do it this way or the way that the instructions say, you're going to end up with 4 different shades of chocolate frosting, which you're going to place into large piping bags fit with a Wilton 1M frosting tip. So once our frosting is all ready to go and our cake layers are cooled, it's time to assemble our cake. I started with my darkest cake layer on the bottom. I actually used the same frosting and then worked my way up to my lighter shades of both cake and frosting. I'm adding a pretty generous layer of frosting between each cake layer just because I'm a big fan of frosting. And it also actually makes it easier to stack and assemble your cake. It almost acts like glue between your cake layers, keeping them together. Once my cake layers were stacked, I began to work on my crumb coat by adding some more frosting at the top of the cake and then slowly working it down the sides. Once I had fully covered my cake layers, I used my bench scraper to get that crumb coat super smooth, cleaned up the edges with my small offset spatula, and then chilled my cake in the freezer for about 10 minutes. Once my frosting was firm to the touch, I started piping on my buttercream rosettes. As you do this, you want to just take your time and make sure that your rosettes are consistent in both size and in the direction that you're piping. I like to overlap mine a little bit so there aren't any big gaps between them. And I also alternated my colors randomly. I started off doing them in the color order of ombre, and then I realized it looked better if I kind of staggered where certain colors were in relation to the other rows. So you can go in whatever order you want. You also could do all of your darkest color on the bottom and work your way up to the lightest on the top of the cake. I think buttercream rosettes are such a classic and beautiful way to decorate a cake, and I'm pretty sure that whatever order you do it in, it will look beautiful. I am happy to share that this cake tastes just as good as it looks. It's absolutely delicious, and I highly recommend giving this recipe a try. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.